However, we don't want to offend them, so go down to the lake and throw it in a line. Open the mouth of the first fish you catch, and you will find a large silver coin. Take it and pay the tax for both.
Perfect. Isn't that awesome? The answer is yes. That's awesome. That's great. So good. Thank you. Charlotte was stressed about how she was going to pronounce Capernaum, or as a lot of Americans say, Capernaum, which that's not the way they would say it in Israel, but that's okay. We're not from Israel. But it's so good to see all of you this morning. The good, the true, the faithful. I had somebody called up and said, well, I'm not going to be able to make it out today to church. And I said, okay. And they said, because of the snow. And I said, oh, where are you from? I thought they were going to say Florida. They said, Spokane, my whole life. Okay, all right. I didn't know what to do. Just say, I'll pray for you. I mean, isn't this what we get every year? And so this is kind of expected, but it's so good to see you. Praise the Lord for being together. So, and in the Bible, there are several expressions. There are dozens of them. I think I've counted as many as 140. But the expressions that we use in everyday language that all come from the Bible. Like, I don't know if you know or not, but another one, bites the dust. The whole idea of biting the dust, that comes out of Deuteronomy chapter 32. Didn't know that, did you? You're being saved or something by the skin of your teeth. Have you ever heard that one? That's from the Bible. That's from Job. And it sounds like it's from Job, right? He's just kind of saved by the skin of his teeth. And there's a whole bunch of eye for eye that comes out of the Bible. There's several of them that come out of the Sermon on the Mount that we use, like that's a salt of the earth person. That salt of the earth motif comes from it. There's several of them. I don't need to go into all of them, but just to let you know that there's kind of a common vernacular. Well, one originated from the story that we talked about last week that just precedes this. And it's the expression we use for a top of the mountain experience. You know, that person was on the top of the mountain, or they had a, mountaintop experience. You've heard that, haven't you? That's a great thing. We've all had, hopefully, some mountaintop experiences. I've had a number of them. The day I gave my life to Jesus, and the grass became greener, and the sky became bluer, and my heart became warmer, and a lot of the fear that I had was gone, and all of a sudden I had a faith that I don't know where it exactly came from, but that was a mountaintop experience. I've had some other ones. There was the day that I wed Marlene. We've been married for, I didn't say wet, I said wed Marlene. So the day we were married, that was a mountaintop experience for me. In fact, she's coming in the back door right now. Why don't you all give her a hand, would you please? Okay. Yeah, so, all right. I just totally embarrassed her, okay? Yeah, she doesn't, because she has no idea what we're talking about. She's doing a bunch of stuff at the church here. But that was a mountaintop experience, the day we were married. We've had several of them throughout the course of our life, where I remember when we were called to go be missionaries. That was quite a series of experiences that we had. I've shared some of it with many of you, but the Lord revealed stuff to us very pointedly. Marlene and I both had the same dream on the same night about the same thing, and it was that we were going to become missionaries, and we had no desire whatsoever to be missionaries, and we were going to go specifically to the Philippines. And so that was a shockeroonie, but it was kind of part of this whole crescendo that took us to this mountaintop type of an experience. I've had several of them since. In fact, I frequently pray that the Lord would just reveal himself in a powerful way. Anytime he does that, we're at the mountaintop. Now, with the exception of when we're there with Jesus, the mountaintop, there's something on the other side of that, and it's down. Are you with me? This is when Jesus came down from the mountain. You're going to see a sequence of things that take place. There are actually 4 things that are impacted, but there's always stuff at the bottom of the mountain. So to use as an example, we had all of this crescendo of things that were where the Lord was affirming that he was in this experience we were going to have when we went to Asia. So It just was all great, and the church was supportive. They raised money for us so we could set up a household and get started. There were people that, well-wishing. This was long before the day of Facebook and social media. In fact, I don't think Al Gore had even invented the internet yet. So, and yes, that was a joke. But we would get letters and cards, tons of them, from all over the United States and stuff. It was a great thing. Then we landed on the other side. We came down off of the mountain and got there and realized the language is hard. Learning culture is even harder, believe it or not, than learning a language. And I made mistake after mistake after mistake, stepped in the bucket several times, totally thought that the people around the world are all the same. Well, we are internally, but the way in which we express it is very different. So cultures are different. So in the very first week or two that we were there, we had one of the pastors that I was going to be working with come over to our house, and I did everything wrong, and I didn't realize I was doing something wrong. So I went out, he rang the bell out of the gate. We were in a kind of a house in a compound of a couple of houses, and there was a gate there, and it had been raining, and I was in my stocking feet, so I just motioned for him to come in, and so he let himself in, reached over and opened the gate and came up. Gave him a hug. We came in, asked him if he wanted to eat. We were just getting ready to sit down to have dinner, and he said, no, he's full. And I said, are you sure? Because we'd really like you to eat with us. And he said, no, I'm full, but thank you. And so we carried on the conversation. Anyway, after a while, I said, our children, it was getting later, and I said, I'm going to have to send the children off to bed. But he said, well, I need to leave. And I said, no, we'd love to have you stay if you can. He said, no, I need to leave. So I went out to walked him outside and waved goodbye, etc. I heard the next day from another pastor said that, why did you treat this guest in your home the way you treated him? And I said, what do you mean? He said that you're the rudest person he's ever met in his life. And I thought, what? I thought we were really gracious. And so he said, well, tell me what happened. So I told him. He said, well, you never have someone work their way into it's terrible manners to just have somebody let themselves in. That means you really don't care whether they're there or not. And I thought, oh, okay, well, I guess I blew that one, didn't I? I had him come in, and you didn't offer him anything to eat. I said, yes, I did. He turned it down twice. He said, oh, well, in our culture, we always say we're full or that we just ate, but you put the food down. He hadn't eaten all day. He was hungry, and he watched you guys eat. I went, oh, okay, there's two. And then a little bit later, he said, you had to put the kids to bed, and you saw the time on the clock, and he said he must leave. He says, but we always insist that the person spend the night, particularly if it's at night, because it's dangerous out there, and there's a lot of travel things, and you didn't offer him a place to sleep. And I could keep going, but let's just stop right there, okay? And I realized I came off the top of the mountain. I'm on the other side. I'm down where stuff happens. And then there were financial things kind of set in, and then there were legal things, technical things that I thought I could do without paying bribes to get done, but they took a lot longer to get them done without. Are you with me? Are you with me? That's the other side of the mountain, okay? That's when you come off the mountain. And so in the circumstance that Jesus was in, he was coming off the mountain where it was the most glorious experience. It says his face, we talked about this last week, shone like the sun, and it says his clothes were gleaming white. They were brilliant. And Moses and Elijah, the great prophet and the great lawgiver, were both there with them. And there's this marvelous, ultimately there's this cloud enveloped them on the top of the mountain, and they heard the voice of the Lord speaking from that cloud saying, this is my son whom I love, with him I'm well pleased. Listen to him. And then Jesus reached out as they were terrified, those three disciples that went up on the mountain with him, and touched them, which is the intimate way that the Lord deals with us in our fear and the way the Holy Spirit answers the dilemmas that we have, etc. And they came up. It was a marvelous experience. Now, Jesus said, don't tell anybody until the Son of Man, speaking about himself, is raised, is resurrected, raised from the dead. You can tell people then. So the three disciples, Peter, James, and John, had to kind of keep this under wraps as they're coming down off the mountain. They get to the bottom of the mountain, and guess what was happening? There were the passage that was just read. which, by the way, in Matthew's gospel, this has 159 words. In Mark's gospel, there are 380 words on the same story. It's more than double. And it tells us a few other things that we're taking on there. You know, each gospel writer will write the things. It's the same story. He's just telling it from, in a sense, his perspective. And so I'm going to reread it, and I'm going to read it out of Mark chapter 9. If you have your Bibles and want to follow along, that's great. By the way, I'm a little scattered here this morning. I'm all over the place, but I had several people say to me in the last week or two, do you have family? And the answer is yes, we have family. So I do have a picture that I thought I'd put up there. This was taken a year ago. This is, Marlene and I are in the middle. We're the not as handsome one as everybody else there. So we have 4 children. One's not in the picture. This was taken last year, but he passed away back in 2008, so quite some time ago. And his wife since remarried and all that. So she and he not in the picture, but we have 3 of our 4 children in the picture, along with 8 grandchildren that we have there. Isn't that a nice looking family? Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah. You're not clapping for me, you're clapping for Marlene. She's the one that kind of led this whole thing. So you can take that off, that's fine. So this is what happened in Mark's gospel, starting in verse 14 of chapter 9. It says this, and you can just listen to me and you'll get the same gist that you just heard. It says, when they returned to the other disciples, they saw a large crowd surrounding them, and some teachers of religious law were arguing with them. So in the other gospel that you just read, it was just people were arguing. Now we find out that the disciples are not only having a hard time casting out a demon out of a boy, but they got pressure because they got the religious leaders who are cynics anyway, and they're critics of Jesus, and they're joined together in this particular one. They're arguing. When the crowd saw Jesus, they were overwhelmed with awe and ran to greet him because, you know, many of them had seen him perform miracles in the past or heard about it, and so he shows up. They think, finally, we've got kind of some help here. What's the arguing all about? Jesus asked. One of the men in the crowd spoke up and said, "Teacher, I brought my son so you could heal him. He's possessed by an evil spirit and that won't let him talk. And whenever the spirit seizes him, it throws him violently to the ground." So there's a little more description here of the problem with the son than there is in the Matthew passage. "Then he foams at the mouth and grinds his teeth and becomes rigid. So I asked your disciples to cast out the evil spirit, but they couldn't do it." Jesus said to them, "You faithless people, how long must I be with you? How long must I put up with you?" And those are the same words that you saw a few moments ago. Then he said, "Bring the boy to me." So they brought the boy. When the evil spirit saw Jesus, it threw the child into violent convulsion, and he fell to the ground, writhing and foaming at the mouth. "How long has this been happening?" Jesus asked the boy's father. And he replied, "Since he was a little boy, the spirit often throws him into the fire or into the water, trying to kill him." In other words, drown him or burn him. "Have mercy on us and help us, if you can." Isn't that interesting? This part doesn't appear in the other gospel. What are you saying? If you're able, would you please do something? And Jesus says, "What do you mean if I can?" Jesus asked, anything is possible if a person believes? And he's kind of getting right down to the rudimentary issue of having faith in the Lord. And the father instantly cried out, "I do believe, but help me overcome my unbelief," which is at least a very true statement. And there are a lot of people that have this intermingled faith and doubt, but or disbelief or questioning, etc. This is something that ultimately the Lord doesn't want you to have. I hear people saying, "Well, everybody's like that." No, you can be convinced. You can be thoroughly convinced. You can have no doubt. So if you are one of those people that are saying, you know, "I do believe, but boy, I got a lot of disbelief," then you need to pray about that and ask the Lord to dispel that, because we're already told in the Bible that anybody that comes and asks for wisdom from the Lord, etc., when they do ask, they should believe and not doubt, because a person who doubts is like what? Yeah, not Matt's hand going up and down, a wave of the sea, just tossed to and fro, okay. So when we do believe, we shouldn't have it commingled or intermingled with doubt. We want to really have solid faith. And certainly Jesus did, had trust in the Father, and he had all the power of the Father at his disposal. And, and so he just saw the crowd of onlookers growing, and he rebuked the evil spirit and said, "Listen, you spirit that makes this boy unable to speak, I command you to come out of this child and never enter him again." Then the spirit screamed and threw the boy into a violent convulsion and left him. The boy appeared to be dead. A murmur ran through the crowd as people said, "He's dead." But Jesus took him by the hand, helped him to his feet, and he stood up. And then that's when it says that after that was all over, the disciples, same thing in the Matthew passage that we just read, they were saying, why weren't we able to cast this one out? And the earliest text says this kind can only come out by prayer. Some versions say prayer and fasting, but in other words, just this whole idea of seriously believing in the Lord and trusting in the Lord. And this is the first experience Jesus has coming off the mountain. He's faced with a spiritual problem. And that's not the only problem he's going to face. We're going to talk about a couple of other ones here along the way. So the demon thing is not common for a lot of people. In fact, I was a pastor for probably, I'd say 7 years before I ever had some kind of experience like that. I have several that stand out in my mind, but one that kind of is maybe most graphically telling in my mind, and I think I may have mentioned this, but when we lived in the Philippines, there was one incident with a police officer who came to drop his daughter off at a church event, and then he was confronted by some people, and he was demon possessed, and he puked demons out. It was really weird because they were kind of going around in different places. But that one stands out a little bit. The one that was the most odd was when I was kind of by myself. I was going into a community where we just planted a church, and my language skills were really bad. And I came through this gate. I had to park outside of this gate. It was a very poor area. There were no roads. It was just kind of walking paths. And all the children came up to me, and there were some adults with them this time. Usually the children accompanied me in, but they said, and you have to remember, my language skills were very bad. They weren't refined at all. I knew maybe 300 or 400 words. That's about it. That was my vocabulary. And so I usually used an interpreter to interpret for me when I was there initially. Well, just so happened this day there was no interpreter there. So I was on my own, and the children ran up and they were telling me, they were shouting out, and they said, "Halika na," which is hurry up. They said, "Meron ng demonyo sa loob ang lalaki." There's a demon inside of this young man. So they were leading me. They grabbed me by the hand and they're pulling me because I'm the pastor, right? And they did what every good person in a church would do. If a situation like that is scary and frightening as it is, they get me to the house where the kid is. His parents are outside, and all the members of the church get behind me and they push me in and close the door. So the whole time that I'm getting there, great church, right? You guys wouldn't do that, would you? You would walk right in with me. But the whole time I'm walking, I'm thinking, great, I don't speak Tagalog very well. I mean, how am I going to cast a demon out of it? And I'm trying to rehearse in my head, how many words do I even know? And I walked in, and this young man opened his mouth. His tongue wasn't moving. It just kind of stuck out. But there was a voice coming out of his mouth. And in perfect English, he said, "We know who you are and why you're here. Get out." Just yelled. And all I thought was relief. I thought, oh, he speaks English, of course. So so we were able to deal with that. And a fellow just like this kid, and I don't know what it is about it. I've never analyzed it or anything, but he just slumped down like he was dead. Well, it tells us in this story, this kid was like he was dead, and they had they thought he was unrestorable, but then Jesus reached out and took him by the hand and brought him up, etc. So it was similar to the experience I had, but those are kind of pressure-packed, daunting things. This is the first thing that happens to Jesus after the Lord has given him his glorious endorsement, affirmation of who he is. Are you following me? This is one of the most traumatic things you'll ever experience. And so Jesus gets down there, and these people aren't able to, that are his disciples. By the way, they had already cast demons out. All we have to do is back up 4 chapters, and Jesus sent them out 2 by 2, and he told them to preach the kingdom, cast out demons, heal the sick, and raise the dead. Nothing big, right? Yeah. And they came back, we're told in Luke's gospel, in Luke chapter 10, that they were reporting all the things that Jesus had told them to do, they were doing, and they were pretty amazed by it, that the Lord empowered them to do it. So it's not like they hadn't done this before, but there were things intermixed, whatever it is. Maybe they became a little bit more doubty, who knows. Whatever the circumstance was, they weren't able to deal with this. And so Jesus turns to them, because he's already worked with them several times where they were overcome by fear or doubt, and several times. One time in a boat going east, he said, "Why have you no faith?" Then they're coming back after they feed 5,000 people, and he's walking to them on the water, and they're disbelieving. He said, "Why have you so little faith?" So apparently they stepped up from no to little, okay, in the course of a period of time. But here they are, and he just says, I like when he says, you have little faith. He uses that term again, and now this time he says, "How long do I put up with you?" Doesn't that break your heart? And I think the Lord has sometimes said to us, "How long do I got to put up with this?" So the first dilemma that he's got off the mountain is probably the deepest kind. And that's a spiritual one. And anytime that the Lord brings us into his presence, anytime we have some great experience with the Lord, you can expect that there's going to be a spiritual challenge. Because we're told in the Bible that the devil roams around like a roaring lion, seeking somebody to devour, seeking those that he can devour. So coming off the mountain, coming off a great experience, Jesus went into the wilderness for 40 days. He fasted, and at the end of that period of time, Satan tempted him. He got kind of the end of this marvelous experience, and he's experiencing the work of Satan in some way. And he deals with it, though, doesn't he? Doesn't he deal with it? He heals the guy. The answer is yes. He deals with it. So right after that story, in the passage that was read, Jesus goes on and he says in Matthew chapter 17, he tells the disciples for the second time, because he did it just when he was up in Caesarea Philippi up to the north. Now he's come down, gone up the mountain, and he's in the mountain, and then he heads back down to Galilee, and this is where this is all happening, which is home for them. Should be a place of comfort and something that's a little bit easier for them to deal with. But instead, when he comes down, he experiences this trauma, and he's got to deal with this, and he does it. Right after that, he moves from a spiritual thing, problem, dilemma, hardship off of the mountain. Then he turns it into a personal thing, where he basically is telling the people, starting in verse 22 and 23, after they gathered with him in Galilee, so this is after the healing of this boy, he told them, the Son of Man is going to be betrayed into the hands of enemies. He will be killed, and on the third day he'll be raised from the dead. And the disciples were filled with grief. So now he tells a personal trauma. He's able to handle obviously the whole circumstance. He knows that there's a resurrection coming, but the reason the disciples are filled with grief is because he's explicit about his own suffering and his own death that's imminent. And they're filled with grief here because he's talking about a personal trauma. Where? Off the mountain, on the other side of the mountain. So he's dealing with a spiritual issue. And then he's dealing with now a personal issue, because this is on his way. For those of you that aren't aware, he's up on a mountain, and then he comes back down, and this high mountain is not too far from Nazareth, where he's at, and he comes back down. He's in Galilee for the last time, and then he's heading up toward Jerusalem, And there's going to be 3 more times that he's going to basically say the same thing. He's going to get a little more explicit each time. He's going to say, the next time he talks about it, he's going to talk about being placed in the hands of Gentiles who will mock him, flog him. And then the next time after that, it says they will kill him. But the next time after that, he talks about being crucified, that they will crucify him. That was the nature of the... So each time he's adding little bits in there of what he's going to go through. So he's unveiling a personal trauma that he will go through, knowing the end result is going to end in resurrection. But does that make the suffering any less suffery? No. Less painful? No. So he starts with a spiritual issue that he's wrestling with this person. And he's the answer, right? And then he's got to deal with the personal trauma. And he's basically talking about it now. He's not experiencing it yet. But you know, as you've walked through with anybody who's passed away, I talked about our son passed away. It wasn't just the day that Mitch passed away that we felt the trauma. Long time before that. 17 months before that, when we knew what he had. So Jesus is predicting this, and he's experiencing it. So he's got this kind of personal trauma that's coming on. And then there's kind of this funky other thing that happens right afterwards. And this is the gospel story in Matthew that contains this particular version of events. When they came to Capernaum, as the people in Israel would say, the collectors of the temple tax came to Peter, and it really doesn't say temple tax, it just says tax. But they assume it's temple tax because there was a 2 drachma tax that was given for the temple prior to Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And so it was the time when they were collecting a tax so they could really have their big party going on in Jerusalem. Well, so he's going to pay with his entire life. They don't know it, but they're saying, don't you have some money too? And so they came, and so Jesus asks them a question, etc. So there's a social pressure thing that's going on, or political, whatever you want to call it. But he came back down to the real world off the mountain, and he faces a spiritual trauma. He faces a personal trauma. And now there's the political or the social kind of pressure that's been put on him. And, you know, and he tells Peter, who do the governing authorities collect taxes from? Do they collect from their own, or do they collect from the strangers? Or in other words, the people that they've conquered, the people that they've overcome. And, well, it's the people they've overcome. Yeah, well, we're people that are citizens here, but so that we don't offend anybody, he said, I want you to go down and I want you to throw a line. That's not the way they usually fished then, and it wasn't the way that most people fished around the world. But they did have the ability to cast a line like we do today. And that's the way Jesus asked him to go. So Peter was typically fishing with nets, but he says, I don't want you to catch a bunch of fish and then rifle through their mouths and see if you can find something there. No, he wants to be very specific to show that he's got this. So he says, I want you to cast out a line, catch a fish, first fish you catch, I want you to bring it in and open its mouth, and voila, there was a 4 drachma, it was called a stater. And there was a 4 drachma coin, which would cover both Jesus and Peter, their temple tax. He said, I want you to collect that and then give it and pay for it. So he's addressing the political and social realities that are there. He's willing to give his entire life, and yet people are asking him, they don't know it. So they're saying, well, aren't you an obedient person and pay the tax? Yes. So then he not only solves that, but he solves it in a financial way. So he's kind of in charge of the financial thing. Now, for most of us, just don't, if you're behind in your bills, don't go to the lake and throw in a line and expect there to be a check that's still legible and $10,000 on it. You might try, Randy. Ain't going to work, probably, okay? I don't know why I picked on him. I've been picking on him for years. So he's got this too. Are you following the thing here? It's not like, oh man, I need to go back up on the mountain. I don't like it down here. The mountaintop experience is actually something that prepares us for all this other stuff. When the Lord puts us in a place where we experience him, and I'm hoping and praying that all of you do what I seek every day, and that is, if you want to call it a mountaintop experience, I want to see Jesus. I want to touch Jesus. I want to hear from Jesus. I want the Holy Spirit to forgive my sin. I want to be as energized and as free from the encumbrances of sin and junk, attitudes purified and cleaned, because you can do that every day. Did you know that? You can have somewhat of a mountaintop experience every day. When I talk to people, how are you doing? And they say, fine. I'll say, from a scale from 1 to 10. I'm always interested in what people say. Some people say 10. Some people say, 1 or 2. And I ask them, what's the trauma? What's the difficulty? How can I pray for you? It frequently gives me an opportunity to pray for people. Just so you know my secret, okay? So if I ask you, how are you doing? And you say, fine, cool, whatever. And I ask you, and then Charlotte, you say, 6. You'd say 9. Okay, good. But there's a lot of 5s or 6s, or somewhere in the middle. And I'll tell you what, it's pretty hard to get through life if you're really on the low scale as far as having an experience with God. And if you have no faith in the Lord, if you're struggling in some deep, particular, powerful way with what's going on in your life, it's really hard to not come off of the mountain and experience all those same things. Financial trauma, social trauma, spiritual trauma, personal issues that you're facing along the way. It's pretty hard to do all that. In this case, there's a man with a son, there's a temple tax that needs to be collected, there's a journey that needs to be carried all the way to Jerusalem, ultimately to the cross, and all that kind of stuff. And there's one key player that brings an answer in every one of those situations. And who is it? Yeah, it's Jesus, isn't it? He's the one that casts the demon out. He's the one that tells Peter to go, do the fishing thing. He's the one that forewarns them of the journey ahead and the things that are going to take place. He's the one that answers the social pressure question that comes up, the geopolitical kind of a thing that comes up. Jesus answers all of that. And if he can do that, being who he is, he can certainly help you coming off your mountain. Do you believe that? I get in places all the time and in situations, Marlene and I have been in places I'm thinking, I don't know, Lord, how are you going to do this? But this is one of those deals where there's just lots of stuff and I'm not exactly sure how we're going to do or what we're going to do, how we're going to handle this situation. I don't have the wisdom, the foreknowledge. I don't have the previous experience to be able to deal with this stuff. So it's kind of like, God, you have to help me. Now, we can be faithful. Faithful to read the Bible, to seek the Holy Spirit, to pray, to do all those kinds of things. We can be faithful, but it's ultimately our faithfulness is to draw us closer, not to be better than anybody else. It's just to draw us closer and closer to the Lord, who is the answer for whatever's on the other side of the mountain. He is. So I got 100 of those kind of stories. I don't want to tell them all, but I'll give you a couple. So Marlene and I, when we were missionaries, we'd saved up. By the way, my salary was cut in half. It's not like I made more money when I became a missionary. We made a lot less. Right, Pris? Do you remember those days? Yeah, you do. Okay. And so we saved all year for Christmas, and our savings brought us to the place where we could spend, and this counts all the food, and we were going to have lots of people over, et cetera, presents for the kids, decor and all that kind of stuff. We'd saved $300. That's how much we had for Christmas. And we got a call just right before Christmas from one of our pastors who had 2 twins and another son, a little older son. But His 3 sons were named 1 John, 2 John, and 3 John. That's no lie. So one of the Johns, I don't even remember which one was. Do you remember, Marlene? I don't remember. Okay. So one of them was sick, ended up with dengue fever, had lost about 15% of body weight. If you know anything about dengue, it's worse than malaria, and a lot of children, particularly, that get it. And these kids at the time were like 5 or 6 years old, and they didn't expect them to live. Well, in some countries, like that particular country, it's not like here. Just take out of your mind that you just go down to the urgent care, you go down to the house. No, everything is prepay, and there's no insurance. And so if you don't have the money, you go to some of the public hospitals, and you just see people lining the streets on mats or whatever, and they're just waiting for somebody, begging for some kind of resource to get in. And if they can't get in, they die in the streets. And this was one of those deals. So he called in the middle of the night. If I remember correctly, it was like midnight or something, or 1 o'clock in the morning. And the pastor called. He was at the end of himself, and he said, we don't know what to do. He's got to get in and get on an IV, because the doctor said that, that's the only way he's going to be well. And I said, okay, how much is it going to cost? They said, he is going to need to be in for at least 4 or 5 days. It's going to cost $300. You guessed it, right? Golly, we can't let this child die, So I said, there goes Christmas. Our kids, by the way, their feet were sticking through their shoes. They had, their shoes were completely worn out at the time. I mean, literally, their socks were being worn out because it was on the pavement. And I thought, okay, I'll trust in you. We'll be obedient to what the Lord, and we'll just pray that Christmas is still joyful and joyous without gifts and on and on. So we surrendered that to the Lord. Got up, went down in the middle of the night, and got him into the hospital, and the child signed him in, paid the money, etc., and he was able to get in a room. The end of the story is after 3 or 4 days, they ended up letting him out. He's a healthy young man now. No, he's a healthy middle-aged man now. So that's a praise the Lord. And I just was a little deflated because I thought, well, God just would need you to somehow come through. Well, I went to the post office. We had a mailbox at the post office. There wasn't door-to-door delivery. And I went there to pick up mail, and there was a letter in it, and it was from a church in Idaho. Every now and then somebody would write us a card, we're praying for you or something, and I thought, oh, this is a nice card. And I opened it up, and it was a Christmas card, and we just hope and pray this is good. We make quilts, and then we sell the quilts, and we decide what we're going to do with the money. And we had 3 places we wanted it to go, and we decided that we were going to send you $300 just for your own use. What you do? Are you with me? Was I able to handle this situation? Nope. Who was? The Lord, by speaking to a group of people down in southern Idaho in the Boise area that sent us a gift. Seemed somewhat random, but I don't think it really was. There's a financial one. The demon ones, I've had those. I was preaching in a church up in a place in the Sidama Highlands in Ethiopia, and it was in a town where it was almost a fully Muslim environment, but one of the imams that was over that particular mosque became a Christian, and I was able to preach at the mosque. And that's an interesting one, right? You don't see very many pastors in a situation like that. And I'm in the middle of my message, and this guy starts running down the center aisle toward me, and he looked like he was going to kill me. I mean, he just was angry. In fact, if I remember correctly, I think he had a knife with him, but I wasn't sure. But he was just running, and I didn't know exactly what I was going to do, but the people kind of tackled him, wrestled him to the ground, pulled him off to the side, and they told me to continue. They said, please don't stop. So I just continued preaching while they're just down here doing their thing, and there was a demon exorcism and stuff like that, and I got an interpreter here, and there's me, and I don't speak Amharic, and so I'm just up there on the stage. And the interpreter, by the way, had that look on his face like, I didn't pay enough for this, or I'm not being paid enough for this. So there was a spiritual thing, and I remember thinking at the time, man, I don't know what to do here. And but who had it? Jesus. You can go through the financial, you can go through the spiritual, you can go through personal trauma, and you can go through social pressure. Jesus experienced all those at the base of the mountain. And you can do that if your mountaintop experience is just simply drawing close to Jesus, getting as close to the Lord as you possibly can. Are you with me? And the people that don't do that, I feel so badly for them, because it's almost like, I don't know what to say. I don't want to be discouraging and say, well, all bets are off. You're on your own. You're seeking your own wisdom. You're making decisions on the basis of the flesh. You're walking by sight, not by faith. You're trying to handle this thing on your own, and God bless you. I don't know how you do it, because I can't do that. This is an incredible story that tells us that there's stuff that's happening, that's going to happen. It even did to Jesus. But Jesus had it then, and with you and I, Jesus has it now. Trust me. So we have two sacraments that we do in the church. One is baptism, and one is communion. We're going to receive communion, the Lord's Supper, here in a moment. And here's an interesting thing about them. Both of the sacraments of the church reflect the top of the mountain and the bottom of the mountain. Do you know that? When we're baptized, it tells us over and over again what baptism is about. On the one hand, it's about death. That's kind of the bottom of everything. But the reason we do it in water instead of dirt, being covered up with dirt, because the water reflects the washing of our sin by the blood of Christ, and we're raised up to new life. And so there's this mountaintop trust in the Lord that he's going to handle this in our life, and he already has. We have committed our lives in faith to the Lord, and so there's this mountaintop kind of thing. But there's the death thing that's represented in it, and hopefully we never forget that. And we're going to receive the Lord's Supper here in a few moments, but when we do, I want you to remember there's two parts of this. One is the reflection, and we're going to use that same liturgy. I know we don't usually do that, but we're going to do kind of a responsive reading like we did last time I did it. It'll probably be the last time we do it here. I just thought it would be good as a community that, since this is really a community thing, this is not an individual thing. When Jesus said, as often as you do this, he used the you plural. He didn't use the you as an individual. And the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians 11, when he goes through this whole liturgy, he talks about the church. You, plural, shouldn't be eating everything up before everyone arrives. In other words, the understanding was it's a community kind of a thing. So we come together, and when we do this as a community, we all acknowledge that that there's kind of a bottom experience, and that is Christ allowed his body to be broken and his blood to be poured out like a sacrificial lamb for our sin. But when we go through this, we do it with gratitude in our hearts, because we realize this represents eternal life. Talk about the top of the mountain. It's the one that there's no backside to, there's no downside to, and it's all reflected in communion. So I'm going to have the people that are holding the